There's a detail buried inside Jannik Sinner's injury updates that deserves far more attention than it's actually gotten. Not the withdrawal from Cincinnati, not the missed Canadian Open, the treatment itself. Shockwave therapy. It's a phrase that's been mentioned almost in passing in recent reports out of Italy. Sinner completing sessions at J Medical in Turin, targeting inflammation in his right knee. Most coverage has treated it as a routine footnote in the broader story of his recovery timeline. It isn't. Shockwave therapy is not a first-line treatment. It's not something teams reach for casually, or as a precaution. It's a targeted intervention specifically reserved for cases where more conservative approaches haven't been enough on their own. At 24, with a Wimbledon title still fresh, with the world #1 ranking still firmly his, Jannik Sinner needed a treatment usually reserved for genuinely stubborn, resistant physical problems. That detail changes the entire shape of this story. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what shockwave therapy actually is, and why medical teams turn to it specifically. The treatment uses focused acoustic pulses, delivered directly into the affected tissue, designed to stimulate blood flow and accelerate the body's own healing response in areas where inflammation has become chronic rather than simply acute. It's most commonly used for conditions like tendinopathy, persistent, deep tissue inflammation that hasn't responded adequately to rest, standard anti-inflammatory treatment, or basic physical therapy alone. That's the key distinction. Shockwave therapy isn't typically the first step in managing a fresh, straightforward injury. It's usually introduced specifically when a more conservative approach, rest, ice, standard rehabilitation, hasn't fully resolved the underlying problem on its own. Teams escalate to this kind of targeted intervention precisely because something about the injury has proven more resistant than initially expected. Consider the actual timeline here. Sinner first withdrew from the Canadian Open, citing the knee issue as something his team wanted to manage cautiously. At that stage, the language around it was calm, almost routine, the kind of update that usually precedes a quick return once basic rest resolves the problem. Then came Cincinnati. A second withdrawal, same injury, same knee, still not resolved through the initial conservative approach. It was only after that second setback that reports of shockwave therapy specifically emerged, a clear signal that whatever this knee issue actually is, it had proven stubborn enough that his medical team felt real escalation was necessary, with the US Open now bearing down fast. So what does this specific escalation actually tell us about the severity of Sinner's knee problem, heading into a tournament where he'll have only about a dozen days to prepare? It tells us this wasn't ever really a minor niggle, despite how calmly his early statements framed it. Athletes and their teams generally reserve language like resting and managing cautiously for issues they genuinely expect to resolve quickly through simple recovery time. When that expectation doesn't hold, when a second tournament withdrawal becomes necessary, and a specific, targeted medical treatment gets introduced, the underlying picture shifts considerably, even if the public messaging around it stays measured and calm. There's also a specific risk profile attached to shockwave therapy that's worth understanding clearly. The treatment works by essentially triggering a controlled inflammatory response, designed to kickstart the body's natural healing process in tissue that's become stubbornly inflamed. That means the days immediately following treatment often involve some soreness before genuine improvement sets in, a process that typically requires real recovery time afterward to be effective, rather than an immediate return to high-intensity training. Layer that onto Sinner's actual timeline. Reports indicate he'll have a short family celebration in Monte Carlo for his 25th birthday, then head directly to New York, with roughly 12 days of training before the US Open begins. If shockwave therapy was only recently completed, that 12-day window isn't just preparing a healthy body for tournament tennis. It's potentially still finishing the actual healing process from treatment, specifically chosen because the initial recovery approach hadn't been enough. Here's where the real tension in this story lives. Shockwave therapy, when it works, genuinely can accelerate healing in stubborn cases. It's a well-established treatment used across professional sport, specifically because it's effective. There's no reason to assume Sinner's team made the wrong call by turning to it. If anything, escalating treatment once the conservative approach clearly wasn't resolving things fast enough looks like exactly the responsible decision a team managing a world #1's knee should make. But effectiveness and timeline are two different things. Even successful shockwave treatment typically needs real time to fully translate into pain-free, high-intensity competitive movement. The explosive stops, direction changes, and repeated loading that a Grand Slam demands match after match. 12 days is an extremely compressed window for that entire process to complete, especially layered on top of 6 weeks without any competitive match play at all. That combination, a knee stubborn enough to require escalated treatment, followed almost immediately by the most physically demanding tournament format in the sport, is precisely the kind of scenario that concerns experts who understand recovery science. It's not that Sinner is walking into New York doomed. It's that the treatment itself, the specific tool his team reached for, tells a more serious story than the calm public updates around it have let on. So what should fans actually take from the news that Jannik Sinner needed shockwave therapy just weeks before defending his US Open title? Not panic, not a confirmed crisis, but a more honest read of the situation than the measured, reassuring language surrounding it has provided so far. This wasn't a minor knock managed with a few days of rest. It was a knee problem stubborn enough to survive an initial conservative approach, serious enough to cost back-to-back Masters 1000 withdrawals, and significant enough that his medical team turned to a targeted, escalated treatment specifically designed for resistant cases. That's not routine maintenance. That's a real injury story, even if it's being delivered in calm, controlled language. Whether 12 days is enough time for that treatment to fully translate into Grand Slam-ready form remains genuinely uncertain. Not because Sinner lacks talent or resilience, but because healing timelines don't bend simply because a tournament's dates are fixed on the calendar. At 24, with a Wimbledon title still fresh and a ranking still firmly his, Jannik Sinner is walking into New York, carrying more physical uncertainty than his public updates have fully suggested. The real story isn't the withdrawal, it's the treatment, and what it actually tells us about how serious this knee problem has really been all along.